Malicious prosecution. The case of Abranath versus Northeastern Railway Company is about malicious prosecution. Dr. Arunnath versus Northeast Railway Company 1886 AC in a case is a case which is related with the tort of malicious prosecution. Malicious prosecution consists instituting unsuccessful criminal proceeding maliciously without the reasonable and probable cause. In a suit for damage on ground of malicious prosecution, what is required to be proved by the plaintiff? All of the above. That he had been prosecuted by the defendant, that prosecution was instituted without reasonable and probable cause, proceeding for malicious prosecution terminated in the favor of plaintiff. The liability for malicious prosecutions arises when the proceedings are instituted before judicial authority and quasi-judicial authority, both A and C. Mistake is a good defense in the tort of malicious prosecution. Which one of the following is not an essential element in a suit for damage for malicious prosecution? The proceeding terminated in the favor of the defendant. Prosecution under tort or malicious prosecution means proceeding in court of law charging a person with a crime. Which one of the following is not an essential element of tort of malicious prosecution? Termination of criminal cases in the favor of defendant. What is the reason for large number of cases relating to tort of malicious prosecution and defamation? None of the above. In order to establish the case of malicious prosecution, the malice must be malice in fact. Malicious prosecution is a tort intending to protect against abuse or legal proceeding. Which one of the following statements are correct in connection with the malicious prosecution? The plaintiff must prove independently of his acquittal that his prosecution was without reasonable and probable cause. Only 3. Even if the harm to the plaintiff has been caused maliciously, no action lies for the same unless plaintiff has proved that he has suffered in such legal injuries. In which one of the following case was this principle initiated? Bradford Corporation versus Pickles. Consider the following statement regarding to institute a case of malicious prosecution. Proceeding must have been instituted by the defendant. The defendant must have acted without reasonable and probable cause. The defendant must have acted maliciously. Which one of the following cannot be described as a malicious prosecution? Money recovery proceeding. Which one is described? Criminal proceeding, bankruptcy proceeding, liquidating proceeding. Consider the following statement. In the action of malicious prosecution, the plaintiff must prove that plaintiff was prosecuted by the defendant, prosecution ended in the plaintiff's favor, defendant acted without reasonable and probable cause. All three are correct. Which one of the following is correct statement? In action for malicious prosecution, plaintiff need not to be proved that total restraint were put on his liberty. This not need to be proved. What need to be proved? That he was prosecuted by defendant without any reasonable and probable cause. Proceeding terminated in his favor. He has suffered damages to his person, property, or reputation. A thief had been committed in defendant house. He informed the police that he suspected the plaintiff for same. Therefore, plaintiff was arrested by the police. A complaint was filed by the defendant, but the plaintiff was subsequently discharged by the magistrate, as a final report shown that there was no evidence connecting to the plaintiff with theft. The plaintiff filed a suit for damage on the ground of malicious prosecution. The plaintiff is not entitled to claim damage for malicious prosecution at all. The defendant has filed a complaint to the magistrate against plaintiff. The complaint was dismissed. The defendant moved to the session judge in appeal. He got himself examined in session trial, although he knew that charge was false and he was acting without reasonable and probable cause. His complaint was dismissed by session judge. Thereupon, the plaintiff filed a suit of malicious prosecution against defendant. The defendant is liable for malicious prosecution. This question is omitted. This question is omitted. Assertion. In the action for malicious prosecution, it must be proved that the defendant had initiated criminal proceeding maliciously without reasonable and probable cause. This one is right, this one is wrong. Action for malicious prosecuted instituted in क्रिमिनल कोर्ट नहीं होगा, सिविल कोर्ट होगा. In a suit for malicious prosecution, which one of the following is not an essential element? The prosecution ended in the favor of plaintiff after exhausting all the steps of judicial procedure. This need not to be. Even in discharge and such things, allow proceedings. Plaintiff was prosecuted by the defendant. Prosecution was malicious. Prosecution resulted in damage to the plaintiff. Which one of the following requirements form an essential element of tort of malicious prosecution? Prosecution of plaintiff by the defendant. Termination of case in favor of plaintiff. Absence of reasonable and probable cause. Malice on the part of defendant. Damage suffered by the plaintiff.